Will America start a global recession? The United States of America has the largest economy in the world. If the US economy slows down, or worse, goes into a recession, then it will have a deep impact on every economy around the globe. If you wonder how the US economy has such an influence on the rest of the countries, it's quite simple. The Americans have an insatiable appetite for products and services, and consume voraciously, and many of these products are imported from the rest of the world. So, when the US economy slows, the demand for the imports comes down. And as you can expect, the countries which export to the US will now see a reduction in their production, shipment, affecting their profit margins, and reducing their overall GDP. There is a popular saying, which goes, "When America sneezes, the world catches a cold." So, the obvious question is America slowing down, or is it heading towards a recession? It should be a simple yes or no answer, but the unique circumstances that the US economy is in, it requires a nuanced and detailed response. The US economy suffered a negative GDP growth, or more accurately a shrinkage of its GDP, in both the first 2 quarters of the calendar year 2022, which includes the quarter which ended in March 31, 2022, and the one that ended in June 30, 2022. Though there is no hard technical definition for a recession, one of the commonly used rules is, if a country suffers 2 consecutive quarters of decline in its GDP, then it can be called as recession. So, by that definition, the US is already in a recession. But, you may wonder, why did we say that it's not easy to answer the question on the state of the US economy with a simple yes or no answer? We'll get into that with details. If you currently live in the United States, it may not be obvious that the country is in a recession, in many ways. The biggest problem the common man is facing is inflation. The prices of goods and services have gone up significantly in the past 18 months. Inflation is usually a sign of an increased demand or reduced supply. However, currently, there are other parameters in play for the high level of inflation in the US. We'll take a look at the complex dynamics that affect the current state of the American economy. There are 3 factors that seem to work against the idea of a recession. First, the US unemployment rate is still at a historically low level, hovering around 3.5%. Second, the air travel and hotel reservations have surpassed the pre-pandemic levels since June 2022, and third, the businesses are finding it hard to recruit or retain employees. Typically, in any recession, the unemployment rate goes higher and higher, unlike what has been happening in the current one. There are several reasons that are attributed to this behavior, but the labor participation rate is one of the foremost. The labor participation rate is a measure of how many are in the labor market, or are looking for a job, at any given time. In several sectors, like the retail and hospitality industries, the number of people who are employed, as on September 2022, is well below the number who worked before the pandemic. So, the interesting fact is, there are more than 1 million people who didn't return to work in some industries, especially for the low-paying jobs, even though the demand has picked up. Now, this brings another question. I know what you are saying. We keep posing more and more questions. We'll provide you the answers as well. Anyway, the question we have is, why aren't these people back in the labor force? There are many possible answers for this, but let's see the most common reasons. 1. Change in attitude of the workforce. 2. The financial help, in the form of multiple direct cash transfer, that was provided by the government to its citizens and businesses, due to the pandemic. 3. The conversion of a large section of the society, who have opted for self-employment. 4. Relocation of some, who have started a new life, in a different career. 5. The inertia shown by some to get back to work, after a long period of staying at home. In this complex scenario, the Federal Reserve or the Central Bank of the United States, worries about a new dimension, namely, the inflation. The Federal Reserve has started raising the interest rates since the beginning of 2022, from a near-zero level. The latest rate hike was done by the Fed, on September 21, 2022, a 75 basis points, or 0.75% increase. By September 2022, the Fed funds rate has moved above 3%. Fed Reserve Chairman, Jerome Powell has clearly signaled that he'll keep raising the interest rates until he sees the inflation coming down below the targeted rate of under 2%. Many economic pundits believe, when the interest rate reaches 3.25 to 3.5%, the Fed will hold. But, that level of interest hike is a huge shift on the upward trend. Though the Fed's goal is to bring down the inflation by reducing the demand, and thereby the consumption, the current inflation is caused by an increased monetary supply, as well as supply-side tightness. If that sounds too difficult to understand, let's try explaining this in simple English. The US government borrowed heavily, in excess of $5 trillion, to spend on the pandemic, and distributed the money to its people, businesses, healthcare workers, and other pandemic-related stuff, including infrastructure. So, there is a lot of money supply within the country. The pandemic has also caused a disruption in the supply chain, especially for products shipped from China, creating an excessive demand for crucial components, thereby increasing the cost of the limited supply. But, the US Fed looks at the inflation numbers, and reacts accordingly. However, if the Fed keeps raising the interest rate, and brings down the spending of both the consumers, and the businesses, it's likely to reduce the GDP numbers even further, and make the imports fall down as well. The reduction of imports will have a direct impact on all the nations that have a positive trade balance with the United States. Trade balance is the difference between a nation's exports, minus the nation's imports. The US has a negative trade balance, also known as trade deficit, with several countries, which means the US is exporting less to those countries, and imports more. China tops the list, where the US import deficit is about $375 billion per year, as per the latest available figures. Mexico is a distant second, where the trade deficit of the US is about $71 billion per year. Japan, Germany, and Vietnam round the third, fourth, and fifth positions with $68 billion, $63 billion, and $33 billion per year, respectively. If these countries and others export less to the United States, they'll start producing less as well. This can cause reduction in their own economic growth, and that creates the domino effect on all the other nations, who are then dependent on their own exports to these affected countries. Since the United States is the largest consumer, by a wide margin, with a very high volume of imports, and they are also the largest economy in the world, any reduction in the US growth, or moving into negative territory, will have a big impact all over the globe. There is one other problem, due to the increased inflation in the United States. When the inflation hits high, the currency of any country goes down in value. The US dollar has been an exception until now, but if the inflation stays high, the dollar value is very likely to go down, if conventional economics prevails. If the US dollar value goes down, the imports become more expensive for the US consumer, creating another spiral in inflation, and reduction of imports. In the current conditions, the US is likely to stay flat in its GDP, or go into a recession. This is likely to have a direct impact on the global economy. We believe this situation appears more and more likely, despite the best attempts made by various economic agencies and governments. The world needs to brace itself to the consequences of the US recession. Thanks for watching.